This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs. I'm Gordon Raquel, and this is Filmmaker U. Now, usually we do an intro, and I have a whole thing set up, and we throw to the person I'm interviewing, but I started talking to Yan, and we just sort of started interviewing. So make sure to check out filmmakeru.com. Make sure to check us out at Twitter at filmmaker_u. And I'm going to be talking to Jon Miles, who's an editor. He did The Crown, Sherlock, Andor, and he currently did Sharper on Apple TV Plus. And so this is my interview with Jan.
It's great. I enjoy it. I enjoyed Andor the first season very much.
Yeah.
I thought that, I'm a huge, I'm a big fan of Tony Gilroy and his writing and all the people involved. In fact,
yeah.
Everyone, from visual effects to the shoot, everyone sort of, they were entrenched in it, I think. And I guess the truth of it is, Star Wars has, been in many versions, isn't it? Many things, and from the Mandalorian all the way back, it's many things. But I guess this, I guess we didn't fully know what we were making.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was the structure of it and everything was in place, how that would be and how that would come out and how that would be received was unknown. And I was delighted, really quite amazed on how the critics, found it.
Yeah. Well, everyone I know who's seen it has said it's the best thing of Star Wars. It's like back to the original sort of storytelling process of here's the story within this world.
And that's quite a bold statement in itself, isn't it? To say that I was a huge fan of the first three. The Lucas, the Star Wars, the Return of the Jedi, and the Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back had a huge effect on me. I was a very young boy, So when I kind of got asked to come and do this, that Star Wars resonated with me. I've seen all the other Star Wars, and I've watched them with my young son. But it was a really, I was pretty taken by the question. But when Andor was received like that, and people say what you're sort of saying, I was like, yeah, that's cool. That's pretty cool. That's quite cool. People sort of found that. And if there's a sort of essence of it going back, if there's anything from me, but what have I put a bit of myself into it, then I definitely put the part of myself who was that child when I watched those first three.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So somewhere in all that, what you're saying, I can kind of connect to, because I really, when I was asked, I was like, I love those first three movies. I mean, Empire Strikes Back, I think, was one of those first films where the sort of bad guys win, right? It was sort of like, I was like, as a child, I was like, is that possible, right? Is this kind of like...
You're like, the world just crumbles around you. You're like, you mean bad people can win?
Yeah. That I don't think as a child I'd experienced that, and I guess that's the sort of weight of that suppression and that sort of imperialism, isn't it? And that as a child, it affected me. So when it comes to do Andor, that was sort of stooped in oppression and imperialism and control, all that came back, part of me came back. So, and went into that work. So I thank you for the kind words, really. So
I think what attracted me to color correction was the fact that we were like the next stage of cinematography. And the creative side was huge, trying to understand what was wrong with an image, how to balance it, trying to understand how to let the tools do what you want them to do. Where else can the technology go? What else can we do? I'm very interested in trying to mold the image and create the best look possible. And whatever tools are out there, you want to try and latch onto them. I'm Eric Whipp, and this is my course on color correction.
I think the best thing I could say about it is I have a friend who is a huge Star Wars fan and is very upset with all the new stuff. And he's like, he was happy with it. And so he's one of those grumpy people who's just like, no, the films aren't making it right. And he was just like, oh yeah, it was really good. Then I was like, oh, it's hitting its mark. It's getting it right.
Yeah, no, that's good. A lot of effort went into that, so that is, that is a good thing, So to say the word's happy connected
Yeah.
to it's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure that there's a piece, there's a little bit for everybody. I remember I went to the premiere. They did a premiere at Leicester Square on an IMAX of the first three, joined together. And it was amazing on the big screen and stuff. But they invited lots of Star Wars fans, and I queued outside Leicester Square and there was a gentleman behind me with his son. It was probably about, I don't know, 10 years old or something. And he was like, "Oh, you looking forward to watching Andor?" And I said, "Well, I've kind of seen it." And he was like, "Oh, okay, how?" And I went, "Well, I'm one of the editors." And he was like, "Oh, that's amazing." He goes, "How is it?" I sort of looked at him. I looked at his son. I went, "It's quite grown up." And he was like, "Oh, okay, that's good. All right, well, we'll look forward to that." It was like, I don't know. I guess it was the only way I could explain it in such a short space of time.
Yeah, and without breaking an NDA.
Yeah, without breaking an NDA, exactly. It wasn't out there. So, but he was. I managed to bump into him, like in the foyer afterwards, and he came over and he enjoyed it, and his son enjoyed it. So. It was quite a nice moment. It was that moment where you sort of realise the effect of Star Wars and the massive fan base, which is extraordinary. So
Yeah.
that's not something I've quite experienced before.
Now we're here to talk about Sharper too, though, because you worked with Benjamin on Andor, if I'm not mistaken, and then went into Sharper. But you've worked with him a lot. When I was going through your two IMDb's. So, like, how did you guys originally meet, and how did this sort of relationship form?
We were both. It was the first season of The Crown that Peter Morgan wrote, season 1, to a company called Left Bank, which was run by a guy called Andy Harries, which I'm very fond of. I've done some projects for him, other projects separately, and Ben had done some projects for him separately. I was sort of invited in to interview from one of the early episodes. I think it was 3 or 4, and with a different director. And he sort of passed. He said, "No, I've got someone else, sort of someone I've worked with before." And I kind of thought that was it. And then I had a call saying an opportunity is coming up for episode 9, which is Assassins. So meet a different director, and I sort of so they put me together with Ben, and I met him for a cup of tea, and he sort of told me that he was possibly going to do an earlier one, and it didn't happen. So he thought he wasn't doing it. So we were kind of like already these sort of peas in the pod, like we all had this conversation of like, I wasn't doing it and I wasn't doing it. I was like, but we're both doing it. And he sort of went, "Do you want to do it?" And I went, "Yeah, I'd love to come do it with you." So we sort of, that was our kind of starting point. And we did Assassins, which is the episode with Winston Churchill, played by John Lithgow, and Graham Sutherland, the painter. And I was really impressed with Ben. He did some fantastic stuff. It was some fantastic performance. I think Lithgow won an Emmy for that performance, I think, in that episode. Or maybe overall, but I think that was probably the defining. Maybe it was good in lots of episodes. But that was kind of our coming together, and we kind of worked together since. It was sort of it was slightly unspoken, but he was like, "Do you want to do something else?" And I've got this happening. And I said, "Yeah." And we did 4 seasons of The Crown together, pretty over a long period of time, a few projects in between. And then that led us to Sharper. He and I talked about film many times. I had some opportunities to do films that I didn't quite, certain films I didn't want to sort of do, certain genres I didn't want to do. So I sort of passed, and a few times I said no to things to work with Ben instead, and then he called me and said, "I've just had this, meeting with Apple and A24, and they're quite keen on me doing it. How do you feel about that?" And I said, like, "Yeah, that'd be great." So I think in a way we've done a lot of television together. We always talked about film. Film always felt made by sort of certain filmmakers. Yet we are filmmakers, it's in a different. And television has changed a lot, as you probably know. Television sort of become sort of pretty central to the medium. With all the streamers have kind of changed that as well, right? So many films go straight to the streamers and whatnot. But it was. So that was pretty cool. To the end of that journey, well, not the end, but part of that journey of our relationship with all those shows we've done, made together, when Sharper came along, I kind of sort of pinched myself a little bit. I know it sounds really crazy, but it was that moment of, I was like, this is an Apple film. Yeah, it's an Apple film. It was A24. It's got Julianne Moore and Sebastian Stan. He cast some good cast, and John Lithgow came back. So that was really the journey. I've spent probably probably nearly like a decade with Ben. It's a long time. I've probably spent more time with him than I have with my wife. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
in the cut rooms, you live and breathe in the cut rooms, and so there's a lot we know about each other. Most of it, and there's a lot of time we spent together. In parts, just brilliant. But I do admire him as a director. I like the way he works. He's taught me a lot. He's kind of got a particular style which I quite like. I've sort of slightly assimilated to him in many ways. I have worked with other people in between, but I always enjoy it. I spent quite a lot of time on set with him, and I like watching the way he works. He's sort of his unpuzzling, his sort of breaking down of how he shoots and stuff. And it's sort of slightly it's very different than the cutting rooms. I sort of come away with it with this, if I go to set with him, with sort of like adrenaline. You get adrenaline. It's like this. You can see why they all love it. The shoot, not for me, by the way, but you come away with it sort of quite charged with this huge unit of 300 people. With the edit, it's like two of us in a room like this with black sheets on the wall. So.
So, like, what do you do on set then? Because are you coming on just to give advice, or what's your role?
He invites me down sometimes just to go and see him if we talk about a scene, maybe a scene that he's shot before, and if he wants, he's asked me sort of how I feel about it, and then other times I go and see him to say hello, and then sort of also on top of that, Ben quite often is like, I've got some sort of second unit, I've got some car stuff to do or some drone stuff to do. And he's like, I can't think of anyone better than you to do it, So he sort of said, so bit by bit, he sent me off to do sort of insert shots and pickup shots and car shots, and that's grown quite a bit. So I've shot for him on Star Wars, I've shot for him on The Crown. I shot all the car stuff in New York. He sort of trusts me. Because I know what he wants. He's like, I'll send you off with a small unit and you film those bits because you kind of know what I want. You know the way I want it. So I would go shoot the sort of in New York, all the sort of car stuff when the cars are driving through New York, like the BMW and stuff. I'd shoot that with a sort of super cool action car unit. These New York guys that shoot the sort of Fast and the Furious. And they're like, so what are we filming? I'm like, a car like this driving behind it. They're like, you want to do something really cool with the dynamics? And I was like, no, Ben just wants a car behind it. That's it. So we sort of, as you could probably see in the photography, it's quite often like that. So that's why he takes me to set, because sometimes I help him and sometimes we just talk and chew the fat, I guess, right?
Now, I do want to know, because what's interesting to me is in Sharper, we're dealing with a lot of unlikable people. And one of the things is, if we're dealing with unlikable people, you want to make sure that the people watching it are engaged and connecting to these people. So like when you were working with him on this, what were the discussions about this to make sure that they're not too unlikable, or they're not, they're just unlikable enough, I guess is the question. Well,
I guess, I mean, it depends on what you see as unlikable, isn't it? I guess that's the sort of slightly in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? I mean, I guess people that attempt to, con people out of money is sort of unlikable. But my take on it is, and this is how I sort of straddled through the narrative of it, is, and I guess in a way Sandra is a good example of this. For me, it's like they're unlikable people and they get drawn into unlikable things, but deep down they're coming from a place where there's something in their lives that's, cause and effect. Sandra's obviously on the wrong side of the tracks and she has some drug issues and she's paroled and stuff. Max has probably got issues in his past. They're probably like mother issues or something, you know. And there are bits in the story that those things pop out, and it's kind of like, I think with Sharper is whether you hear those, whether you think you're coming out the voice of the person who's conning you, or whether actually they're the real person. And that's my biggest question in Sharper. For me, I always believe that these people are the real people. This is just what happens, what they do, you know. So when do you get to really meet those people? So I guess in your sort of answer to your question in a sort of elaborate way is I always sort of felt like what was inside them, when are these moments, when to sort of hold those little moments, when's that little bit of nuance that hopefully one picks up on, that these people are kind of, you know, you say unlikable, but there are things inside them. There's a reason why they're unlikable inside of it, you know. And I sort of think everyone has an answer to that in the sort of film, you know. And Sandra, sort of being Sandy at the start of the film, goes through all that stuff and cons Tom and gets trained by Max. But by the end of the film, when you unravel it, you sort of replay that experience she had with Tom. And actually, she wasn't underneath. You know, the real Sandy was someone who isn't unlikable. Of course, she's done what she's done, and she's conned him out of that money. But you see the side of it where she was affected by him and sort of fallen for him, you know.
Yeah, well, and I really like their relationship. Like the actors really gelled.
Yeah. I think it's like, for me, there's a scene. There's a good example. There's a scene. This is in the writing, but you know, I guess also the way I've cut it in the performance. But there's a scene where Tom is insisting to go and have these guys seek down Sandra, right, and find her. And she cooks him some dinner. She sort of tries to be mother. She cooks him this dinner that she sort of fakes together, right, from the shopping. And they sit down and have an argument, and she tries to talk him out of it. Obviously, she has to talk him out of it, right, because she doesn't want him to get on the scent of, you know, Sandra and go and find her. And then she sort of tells him off and says, you know, stop being my mother. And she shouts at him, and then she comes out with this brilliant line. I think we're all human, just doing the best we can. For me, that's the real Madeline. That's what I'm trying to say, is even when these characters say these things, they are inside the con, but those lines are real. You know, that's when they're real people. So I think unlikable is a viewpoint in one respect. I mean, of course, you know, you and I would probably, no one would like someone to come and con them of money. I understand that. However, I think in all facets of life, right, people are with people that have problems with people, you know, and hurt them. I mean, even in a sort of romantic relationship, we've all had our hearts broken, right? In some way, maybe not over money, but some way in that could be money involved, isn't it? Divorce, marriage, you know, all those things. So in many ways, it's playing on those same ideas. You know, Madeline stays with Richard because she wants that huge security. But at the end of the day, Max says, you know, you'll break, you'll get found out, you know, you'll get bored. And she does, you know. So the good example of that, she steals the ring, even though she's got the billions, right? Once a thief, always a thief, you know. So I think it's like that. I think so. That's for me, that the balancing act was just leaning in moments of where people was like, is that the real Max? Is that the real Sandra? You know, I think when Madeline meets Max in the hotel room after she slapped him, you know, the next day, and they kiss, which is a bit of a shock. So you think it's mother and son. You know, she asks him to sort of he sits there in silence for a little bit before she straddles him. That's for me the real Max. There's some sort of past harm. I think in the burger bar when he's talking to Sandra, he says, I was just making conversation. Do you have a mother? And he says, yeah, I have a mother. I hate my mother. You know what I mean? So these things are all different threads, I think, you pull at these characters from the past. You know, I think it's quite a lot to take in Sharper. And I think there's quite a few sort of onion layers. And I think if you go into it like a sort of con movie, the way it's presented, I think you'll just spend the whole time thinking, I can see the con, I'm seeing the cons come, I'm seeing it. And I don't think, for me, it's not that. For me, it's about people wanting to be loved and the human condition and how we affect one another. And I think we do that on a daily basis in lives, you know, in all of our lives, just not with trying to steal $9 billion. You know, there is that part of the entertainment of it. Of course, I'm not denying that, you know, but there's no guns, there's no bank robbing, there's no violence, you know. That's sort of, there's a sort of, everyone's looking for some kind of redemption, I think, you know.
Well, and Julianne Moore's character sort of falling in love with her with John Lithgow, right?
Yeah,
Or deciding to marry him.
yeah,
Um, Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is it comes in vignettes, right? So it's like comes in
yeah,
blocks specifically focusing on someone. And whenever I think about editing, it's always referred to as the last rewrite or the last sort of rebuild or redo of the script. But in
yeah,
this, we have these vignettes that we sort of have to keep structured, especially since there's a lot of reveals depending on where you are.
yeah.
So what was, what changed from the script in the edit suite, and what were you able to move things around?
No, it's really interesting you say that, because the structure was always in that structure from Tom, Sandra, Max, Madeline. There was never a Sandra card in the script. In the script, they just had names, and very soon on, we just that seemed sensible. We just put a name card up. I don't think there was one for, there might have been one for Tom, I can't remember, but we started to film with Tom and we just put it up and it was a white bit of text on black. And funny enough, that stayed. That was it. There was no sort of, it was glued in there forever. But that structure was always scripted that way because it's sort of in its non-linear nature. Sandy, the last bit off the plane, that sort of last wrap up, the sort of how and why, that didn't have a card, but Ben and I decided in the gut rooms to give it a card, and we just went. By the time you get to Madeline and Sandy, it's linear. It's all linear. But what we did do to go back and put the card onto Sandy is that we replayed the little bit backwards, and you saw her come off the plane because the plane was leaving at the end of the Madeline reel. You just saw it moving back when she banged on the door of the bathroom. So we just went back a tiny bit in time, like 20 minutes, 5 minutes or whatnot. But that still played out in linear. But obviously, Reel 5 was obviously lots of different stories on the how and why. So it's pulling from everywhere. And in order to understand kind of lots of narrative in it, and particularly the Sandy reel at the end, we did never in the Avid, but we did on whiteboards on the wall, reorder the film back into a linear way with characters written on the wall, and there's time jumps in the gaps. It's like you don't see, we didn't see Madeline get married, did we? We didn't see Richard die, right? So there's these huge gaps in those linear storytelling, and we used to have big gaps between the names, and we used to write imagine lots of the story beats that would happen. Like thinking like in sort of normal scripts, you sort of think like someone's backstory, right? You sort of someone can understand where they are in the film. You want to know what their backstory is, even if you don't see it or perform it or write it. So I guess in this we did that to sort of inform us of the gaps in the linear version, would then help us slightly understand how to replay the Sandy reel in a sort of linear way, but from the non-linear story. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's very, very fascinating. Now, I have one last question for you that I like to ask everyone I interview, and it's just a fun question to wrap things up, and that is, what would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Guilty pleasure. Guilty pleasure meaning like the show I shouldn't really watch.
Yeah, some people take it as like, oh, that's, like I shouldn't watch reality shows, and I watch them. And then other people take it as, it's Sunday afternoon, you're flipping through the channels and you just stumble upon a movie and you're like, I got to watch this, and you'll sit and watch.
I guess if I was to say my guilty pleasure would be, strangely, on the British TV, we have we rerun a lot of stuff on Sundays, and I think if I've had a couple of glasses of red wine too many on a Sunday and I have some time to myself, my guilty pleasure would be watching back-to-back Columbo in the afternoon. They
Fantastic.
Columbo. And I think there's something about Columbo I just adore. I think it's sort of that actor, I can't remember his name, they're all sort of shot in Los Angeles, they're all shot on film, and it's a whodunit, right? It's a whodunit in the sort of world. And he's always in these great places, and I just love that character where he's like, one more thing. So I mean, that's my guilty pleasure. So I've said it. As if that I got a soft spot for MasterChef, but that's because I just love to watch people cooking. So that's probably the second one.
What I thought was interesting, I remember talking to the editor of MasterChef, and they said when they did MasterChef Kids or Junior or whatever it is, they realized that it made the chefs that are like Gordon Ramsay, it gave him like a softer edge, and they were like, oh, we have to like lighten him up in the actual MasterChef a bit. He's too harsh.
It made them sort of look like evil villains.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. No, I get it. I just, you know what it is, I get so, as an editor as well, I guess, I just love it, the fact they sort of do this cooking thing and then they sort of cut to that sort of, you know, the olive oil's dripping down the side of the salmon, and the voiceover is timed and the music beats timed, and it's all so constructive. But I'm like,
it's like that. My British TV show is Gardener's World. It's just so relaxing, and it's just you could that's perfect. And it, like you said, it's like we're gonna always open with the shot of a flower being bumped a little bit.
Well, it knows what it is, isn't it? And it knows what it is, and it's very good at that. And you know, and I think sometimes the people on it are absolutely fascinating. Someone comes on, and they're sort of 22 years old, and they're cooking like they're sort of like they've cooked their whole entire lives. And that's extraordinary. You know, and that's what I think. There's something rewarding and satisfying by that celebration of skill attached to sort of knowledge attached to sort of the past. You know, I think that's really extraordinary. The other show I watch is Atlanta, which is not the guilty pleasure, but that's the show that I'm stuck in at the moment, which I really, really enjoy. But
have you ever, I can't remember the name of the show. But there's one on Netflix, and they have like 3 chefs, and they're every episode is the same chefs, but they're given like come up with this crazy idea, like it'll be like, we have to do a wedding, you have to create the cake, what are you going to do? And each of them like researches and figures out some kind of crazy thing to do. It's really like that's the thing, is you're watching it like, because it always like it comes down to how does it look and how does it taste, and then like that's sort of the wrap up, and there's no voting people off. It's just who made the best this week, and then next week they do it again, and it's really
it's a bit like making Arab television, isn't it? So how's it look and how's it taste? It's like I always sort of, you know, the analogy of a good Arab television is having a really good starter and a main course, but not having the dessert, right? And then it works really well. And if you have this over large main course and this huge sugary dessert, it doesn't work, right? So maybe there's the parallels of MasterChef it's all in there, you know. I'll have to watch it. I'll have to find it. It's on Netflix.
I'll have to get the name and pass it along to you.
I'm not sure I can take on another cooking program then. That would be 2 guilty pleasures, or maybe. But no, it's a good question though. It's a very good question.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
So that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.